Hi, this is Rob Sheen from the Source Conference, and I'm here with Chloé Messdaghi, Jason Haddix, and JP Villanueva. And they're going to be doing a panel next week at Source Boston, on May 1st through 3rd, and theirs is specifically on the 2nd. And they're going to be speaking on BountyCraft, BountyCraft the panel, which is an epic sounding title. So you guys have all been very involved in bug bounties, so that's obviously what the panel is going to be about. Why don't you, one of you jump in and tell me a little bit about what the panel is going to be on?
Sure. So the panel is basically going to be finding out about the best tools, the best resources, but also the journeys of the people on the panel. So Haddix and JP and Vanya as well, about their stories and how they got to where they are, what was their background beforehand, and how did they get into bug bounty? How did they find out about bug bounty? And that's pretty much what we'll be covering. And then also we'll touch base on other different factors as well. But I think like the best part is always the Q&A session at the very end.
Got it, cool. So, so it sounds like, so since you're talking about kind of the journey of, you know, the bug finders, what kind of at a high level is the journey of a bug finder? Like, how does one
Ooh,
get started in this? Who wants to jump
Haddix.
in?
It's super crazy because everyone is a little bit different, right? There's been a lot of polarizing discussions, especially over the last week, about the journey of how people get into information security, especially security testing. And so every one we do of these, of the BountyCraft panel, we bring on a new researcher. And so we get a different perspective of, I think that, we've had students, we've had people who come in from sysadmin backgrounds, we've had people who've come in who just learned how to test and, didn't really have much of a tech background, who got into it without really much beforehand. We've had people who have had, less than great decisions made earlier in their career and then turned it around and been able to make great careers. So the panel usually gives us a pretty variable, background of diverse people to kind of talk to about how they got into it. So, and then how they succeeded, right? So the normal journey for most of us, though, is at some point we go through our career and realize that bounty is a way as a secondary income. And we start with a platform usually. The platform bounties are much more approachable. So BugCrowd is one of those platforms, and you'll register on BugCrowd and you'll have access, and then you have basically this path that you walk of trying to prove that you're skilled and get the platform metrics built up on the BugCrowd platform, and then finding your niche, what you're good at, like crypto or like SQL injection or other AppSec type vulnerabilities. Most of the bounties are AppSec focused, but you find your niche and you go after it, and then you start getting more invites, and then you start making significant contributions to the platform. And so talking about those things and what's worked for you, some people are really good at recon and finding sites that other people couldn't find. Some people are really good at reverse engineering. Some people are good at testing for injection vulnerabilities. And the conversations we have in the panel are just about like what have been your successful tips, and also some of the non-spoken things about bounty is how hard it is and how intimidating it is to get into it. Like bounty hunters have competition. When you're a pen tester, you're not really competing against anyone. You're doing your best work, but you're not competing against someone else. And so, a lot of times people will give up or before they even really get some success going. And so we talk a lot about, how to keep your drive going, how to stay efficient and things like that in the panel.
Awesome. JP, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, and I think it's important to really point out kind of what Jason was talking about earlier is that we kind of the people who get involved in bounties, there's different things that get them there. For example, some people get there because they have no other means to make a living from security. They live in countries where being a pen tester isn't necessarily a job, right? And we forget that, and we forget how privileged we are sometimes of even having this kind of job where now we can be anywhere in the world and do pretty much the same exact thing. Some others come from a traditional background, such as myself. I had a sysadmin background and a computer science background, and I naturally like security, so I kind of led myself there. Or some people who are just curious, right? So it's really a mix of all different types of people. It's not, I wouldn't say just kind of one path. It's various paths, but we all end up in the same place.
Got it. So if somebody wanted to get started at doing bug bounties as a way to kind of get into security, what would just at a high level, obviously you don't want to give away the whole talk, but just, at a high level, what would be some of the things they could do to dive in? Because as you said, it's probably a little bit intimidating for people thinking, oh, I got to compete against all these professionals. How do I even begin to start here?
There's more resources than ever before, which makes me super happy, honestly. When I started, there was not a ton of resources. Even CTFs were relatively still a new thing for people to as a stepping stone into learning security testing. And but now there's a ton of broken web apps. There's a ton of training courses that are free. You can go to things like Cybrary. We have one called BugCrowd University that we recommend all of our researchers go through. It's a whole e-learning course on how to do application testing. There are just hundreds of resources, and then also targets that you can hack to learn application testing, or even reverse engineering and stuff like that are absolutely free. You can set up in your own lab, and you don't have to expose yourself to any risk by doing the kind of stuff. So usually when a bug hunter starts that journey, we recommend them first to try out BugCrowd University. We talk about first about what Bounty is and get into it, and then what common vulnerabilities people are finding. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the talk, what are the top 10 vulnerabilities people find on websites based upon our platform data, which is probably more applications than any pen test firm has ever seen, honestly. So we talk a little bit about that and how to get exposed to those and what the best free resources are to try them out, things like Pentester Lab, and on all of these training courses are just excellent resources to get started. So we have those built out in BugCrowd University. We curate the topic, and then we guide them to where they can actually test it in real life and set up a lab, and then that's kind of their journey to get started, and that gives you some confidence. There is a small leap of faith, I would say there. The leap of faith is, oh, hey, I've done it in a lab environment, but do I think I can do it against a real enterprise level site? And that is less about competition and more just about believing in yourself and thinking that you have some skill testing and identifying these things. And so we try to focus on that a little bit too, about how to get that confidence to move into actually professionally working, I guess. Yeah.
Awesome. JP, any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean,
go for it.
Okay. Either of you.
Yeah.
Go, JP.
I was just gonna say, yeah, it's the leap of faith is true of anybody in the industry. Even for myself, I was a former pen tester, and I wasn't bad at it, but then I started doing bounty, and it was a lot harder than I had initially thought, because if there's so many people going at this, at these applications, seemingly would be picked dry, but people still manage to find a lot of things, right? So that leap of faith is pretty important, and you just gotta it's like everything else. You gotta stick to it, and you gotta believe in the journey and believe in what you can do, and then you'll eventually hit, right?
Yeah, I completely agree with both your guys' points about the leap of faith thing. The other good resource is Web Hacking 101 by Pete Orosky. It's a very good book too, if you're just starting and trying to learn.
Yeah, we usually say for web hackers, there's several resources. There's to start out with, right? The one is what we call the Web Hackers Bible, which is written by David Studdard. It's the Web Application Hackers Handbook, and it's been the resource for quite a while. And then there's also OWASP, who does they do their OWASP testing guide every year for web applications. So if you're looking for print resources, those are probably the two best print resources. And then Pete's book is a new edition from the last couple of years, where he approaches the same type of training in AppSec, but does it by case study. So you can see it in a real life site. You can read his narrative about where the vulnerability actually was, which actually I think is an interesting tangent we take sometimes in the panel. It depends on how technical the panel is, but there's a difference between being able to do a CTF or a lab and knowing that the vulnerability is in a certain place, and then going onto an enterprise site and knowing that the vulnerability is probably there too, but you have to find it, right? It's like an Easter egg hunt, right? Where would that vulnerability manifest itself in this site? And so when I focus on talking about AppSec testing wherever I am, sometimes the panel, sometimes in training or whatever, I tend to now focus on that, because it seems to be for people the hardest thing to identify is like, yeah, I understand the technical vulnerability. I could exploit it if I had a verbatim place that you told me where it was. But apps are so complex nowadays. There's so much dynamic input to any application, even the source site, right? Like if you look at the source of the source, security conference and training site, right? It's probably hosted on some type of CMS and like infinitely complex, lots of functions, lots of dynamic parameters. And so knowing where to attack is almost just as important as how to attack.
Got it. Got it. Please don't attack my site.
No, no plans. No plans. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing about the journey, because in a leap of faith, especially, because I can tell you, just having embarked on a number of journeys in my life, entrepreneurship and just things like that. Like, there's always this leap of faith that has to occur where you're just like, all right, I'm doing this, and you just go for it. So it's kind of cool to hear that with the bounties, it's kind of similar. You just jump right in and just trust that you'll be able to figure it out and you'll get there. So that's cool. So in recent years, I've not really done any penetration testing. So I'm kind of curious. I noticed you mentioned in the abstract that that the web attack landscape has changed. So I'm curious to get some thoughts on how things have changed over time, in recent years compared to, say, 15 years ago or 20 years ago, even 10 years ago.
We could spend hours on
we can talk about that.
Super high level, just super high level, just like a few points. Obviously I don't want to waste it all for the panel, but just a few quick points.
No, it's fine. I think there's two things that come to my mind. One is the old nomenclature of like having like an external DM or like having a DMZ and an external site and then connected to an internal network. That's gone, right? It's all replaced by cloud now. Everybody's in the cloud. And everybody is rapidly, with DevSecOps, rapidly bringing up and spinning down all kinds of different infrastructure, whether for their core service or for development and testing or CI/CD, tools or whatever, right? There's a lot of stuff that is just going up and going down in the cloud. So you see a lot of bounty hunters focusing on finding obscure targets that are not the main website, which is one way that you can go about this. The other way is to focus hardcore on the main asset, we would call it, the main core asset, and instead of finding auxiliary targets that are related to get in this type of testing. And in that world, I would say that we're just, as an industry, struggling with dealing with input when it relates to like libraries and parsers and stuff like that. Anytime you parse a link, anytime you parse a PDF document, anytime you parse an image, if you look at the history of big vulnerabilities in the last year, we've had major libraries that 90% of the industry use, like ImageMagick, to resize images, have RCE vulnerabilities, remote code execution vulnerabilities found against them. And so these are, if you look at a subsection of our, what we call P1s on the platform, there's a lot of attacks against things that parse URLs or things that parse images and able to do things like remotely control the Linux machine by appending a command in an image binary. Like, that's crazy sauce. It's crazy, like, to explain over a 20-second blur, but these are the kind of things people are finding. Or when you pass a link to a website somewhere, whether you're putting it in your bio on a website or you're passing a link somehow that website might call out to that link, and there are a number of attacks associated to passing a link to a Linux server that it's going to parse. And so just any place that takes input that's non-text based has been just an issue over like the last year, especially in common libraries. At least has been my observation.
Yeah, and then kind of historically, kind of building on that is like I knew 10 years ago, like I would just put in, the same magic string and I would pop XSS every time. Nowadays, you have to really work at it. There's like so many other, controlling factors. There's, libraries that protect against XSS now. There's WAFs that hopefully protect against, XSS. So there's so many more layers now that you have to get through versus 10 years ago when you could just like point and spray at any, like have a list of parameters and just spray at it and you'll get something. Like I remember I used to get SQL injection pretty much every single day, and nowadays SQL injection is pretty rare. I mean, when it does happen, it's pretty major, but then kind of looking for it is unless it's some kind of legacy site, like the newer sites that are built on the newer libraries and stuff like that protect against it. So the attack landscape has gotten a lot more complex, and thus kind of the attacks that I'm seeing now, like what Jason was talking about, is like newer types of attacks, subdomain takeover, XXE, SSRF, things of that nature are now more prevalent now that things like cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, URL redirection are no longer kind of the bigger threats, right?
Yeah, platforms engineer themselves out of those bugs pretty quick. The other one that we never see a decline of, and this is just based on platform data that I just pulled up right now, is access control bugs, or indirect object references, people call them, right? There is no library that fixes that basically gives you a standardized access matrix, right, for all your user types and stuff like that. So if user A can access the admin dashboard because they're an admin, and user B is not an admin but can still access that admin dashboard if they go to the URL, that's a tragic flaw, and there's no library really to fix that available in most languages. There are libraries that try, but don't do like a super great job. And so mapping out access controls really is a tough problem, and a lot of people. I don't think I've ever seen a bounty here at BugCrowd that has not had an access control based bug on it ever. I don't think I remember one. So yeah, that's always a constant.
Also, authentication and authorization is notoriously hard to do right. So, that's another thing that just hasn't really changed. Meanwhile, all of the other bug classes like cross-site scripting, SQL injection, and like cross-site request forgery are kind of at the back seat now, right?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to hear that, some of those things as they're declining. It sounds like, though, a lot of the things that you're seeing that are core are definitely things that we did used to see. Like access control has been an issue as long as I've been in security.
Yeah.
And input and output has been an issue as long as I've been in security. It just seems to morph and change shape as far as what exactly you're talking about. But fundamentally, in my mind, security has always been an input and an output game.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Any final thoughts? You guys want to throw out there before I?
Make sure to catch the panel.
Yeah, make sure you catch the panel. Yeah, it's a really cool panel. I would highly suggest that anyone who just wants to get their head in about like what bounties are and the journey of the testers, and obviously we do a QA at the end if we have some time. So it's really nice. And the other thing too is that we've seen this talk morph into like a really technical talk, or a non-technical inspirational talk to like get people like into the idea of bounties. We really kind of try to take it wherever the audience wants it to go, whatever their questions are and stuff like that. So it's a cool panel to be on. Look forward to joining, and thanks for giving us the opportunity, Rob. I really appreciate it.
No worries. Yeah, the conference itself tends to attract kind of an interesting mix of people between business and security. So often, even when I run sessions at Source, I don't know exactly where it's going to go. We just kind of dance with the conversation and play with it. So it sounds like this is going to be one of those. So that's going to be awesome, and we're going to have a good time. So you guys are scheduled for the morning of May 2nd, and anybody that wants to come and learn about bug bounties should definitely come on by to Source, and we'll see you there. So, thanks, guys.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you next week.
All right. Hey, Vanya, I see that you signed in. Sorry, we just finished.
Dude, I am so sorry.
No worries, man. No worries. We hyped up that we have like a diverse audience a lot of the time, and so you'll be that diverse audience this time around. So we're happy to have you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. If you want to catch up offline, Vanya, just hit me and Chloe up.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
I'm going to cut the recording now, and then I'll try to figure out where to exactly cut this.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Rob. All right, bye.
Yeah.
All right, bye, Rob.